Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today we're going to interview author Jonathan Nicholas. Jonathan, I've read some of your stuff. Born in Norfolk, moved around the world, ended up in Nottinghamshire. I think that's it in a nutshell, but it's far more interesting than that.
Yeah, well, the police journey started really in 1976 when I was living in Sheffield. I grew up in Sheffield and I fancied a bit of variety. So I went down to Snig Hill Police Headquarters in Sheffield, South Yorkshire Police, to join as a cadet. And they showed us a film of somebody getting stabbed and fighting in the street and lots of blood and guts. And they interviewed me briefly, and then because I grew up in what was sort of posh end of Sheffield, they told me to go away and come back when I'd seen a bit of life. Even though you could join the police at 16 as a cadet, I didn't seem to be the sort of material they wanted. So I got my A-levels, and then I went abroad on and off for 5 years, hitchhiking and working hand to mouth for anything I could. I'd lived in the Middle East for 18 months, and then I went to Australia and got a job selling stuff door to door. And for a while, I lived for 6 weeks. I lived as a vagrant, travelling around Australia. That was quite insightful, actually. But it's ironic that I was quite happy. I had nothing other than a change of underpants and a diary. But I was happy. That was quite bizarre at the time. Then I went to New Zealand. I did some time in France, and I worked as a labourer in Germany. Like Auf Wiedersehen, but it wasn't a building site. It was a Baumschulen, which is a load of muddy fields where they grow trees, and your job is to dig the bloody things up when somebody wants a tree. And I remember when it first started raining, I started walking off, and the German fellow says, "Was machen Sie?" And I said, "Well, I'm going. It's raining." Arbeit. And I thought, oh my God, I just stand there digging in the rain. It was awful. But that was great practice for fixed point duty in the police when it started raining.
I bet. So, I mean, you've done Bondi Beach, you did all the things. Where were you in the Middle East?
I worked on 2 different kibbutz in Israel. I'd never heard of Israel, and I'm not Jewish or anything, but my elder cousin, Andy, when we were just 17, almost 18, he said, "Why don't we go to a kibbutz?" And I said, "I've never heard of the place. What is it?" And he said, "Oh, it's a collective farm in Israel, and you work and you don't get paid, but you get sunshine and all this sort of thing. Great life experience." I thought, well, I'm not particularly interested, but I'll go if you're going. And then a few weeks before, everything was booked. He didn't go. He went to university instead. And so right, okay. So I flew out there on my own, and I got a bus from Tel Aviv up to northern Israel, because the lady in the kibbutz office in Tel Aviv just said, "Well, where would you like to go?" The whole map of Israel. And she said, "This is a good kibbutz." And it was right on the border with Lebanon and Syria.
Wow. And
as naive as I was at the time, I was only just 18. I thought, yeah, that's all right, in the mountains, you know. And, of course, I spent half my time in the air raid shelters because of the PLO rockets and stuff. But it just wasn't, when you're 18, you don't fear like you do when you get a bit older.
Oh, no. No.
It's really weird.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as you get older, you start to face your mortality a bit more. And
yeah. Yeah, it was just great fun when we were 18. I met some great lads from Birmingham and Yorkshire, and we just had a great time drinking a lot and sightseeing and stuff. And after 6 months, I came home, and there was a lot of pressure from my parents to get a proper job. So I got a job in Lloyd's Bank in Grantham, and I knew after a week that this is just not for me. There's just nothing happening. No disrespect to people who've worked in a bank, but oh dear, no, it wasn't for me. I thought there must be some sort of job out there that I could do, but I was still had the itchy travel bug. So I went back to Israel, but I went to a kibbutz near Gaza this time.
Right.
And we used to bunk under the fence and walk into Gaza City to the beach. All the Israeli soldiers wouldn't let you in at the checkpoints, so we bypassed the checkpoints and went and chatted with the locals in Gaza on the beach and so on. Great time. And I did that for 6 months. Then I went back. Then I went to Germany and that's when I did the Baumschulen thing for a summer. And then I went back to the Gaza Strip area for another 6 months. And then I went to Australia for a year. And that's when I lived as a vagrant briefly around. I hitchhiked from Sydney to Brisbane, up to Townsville, across to Mount Isa, then up to Darwin. And I ran out of everything, food, money, inspiration, and everything in Darwin. And I just literally bumped into this guy I'd known briefly in Brisbane a few months before. And he was renting a flat there. And we went back to his place and we had Vegemite on toast. And it was food I'd eaten for 3 days. And he could see how desperate I was. And he loaned me $20. And with that, I managed to get all the way back round to Sydney via Alice Springs. And I got one hitchhike lift from Alice Springs all the way to Adelaide. It took 4 days.
Oh, my life.
So, I know. The guy whose car it was, he slept in the hotel, and I'd got a little tent. And I slept in my tent in the hotel grounds. It was bizarre. Then I got a lift near Brisbane, and this guy... I'd gone all the way around Australia and never felt threatened until the very last lift. This guy said, it was late at night, and he said, well, you've obviously got to stay with me in my room tonight, haven't you? Well, what do you mean? He said, well, we can have some fun, just me and you. We can have some fun, have some drinks. And as the car stopped at some traffic lights, I just bailed out. And no offence to anybody, it was quite a compliment.
No. Yeah,
I'd got skimpy cut-off jeans, shorts, and I was so slim in those days. I was 10 stone. I'm 13 and a half now, but it was an interesting time, and I think it was good for when I joined the police, because when I joined Notts Police in February '84, February the 22nd, 1984, everybody remembers, don't they?
Do.
I didn't know I'm not sure they wondered what to make of me at all. In my reports, my recruitment reports, it said that I was a very independent person. But that's maybe so, but it's no more than anybody else. I was joining with people who'd been in the RN, people who'd been in the Merchant Navy.
Yeah.
No less independent than they were,
But your life's experiences are different, and you can bring a lot of those into policing, certainly when you're dealing with people there. But going back to your Australia bit, my son lives in a place called Mission Beach, which if you went up through to Cairns, then you'd have gone past Mission Beach. Yeah, he lives there. But it is fascinating. And you're talking 1978, there or thereabouts.
When I went to Israel,
yeah. And the world was changing in the UK then. We just celebrated the Queen's Jubilee, 25th, 25 years. Music was just totally off the rails, because it was just. But when you put it into perspective, the Second World War had only finished 33 years beforehand.
Yeah.
So we were that generation that I don't know. It's just things have changed so quickly in such a short space of time. So you've done all your travelling, and we're now in Nottingham, 1984. You say February 22nd, so we're coming up to the anniversary. What was that like? Because we were getting into the miners' strike. Nottinghamshire faced a lot of issues around the miners' strike.
Yeah.
What was that like, joining the police service then?
Well, it was just bubbling up. And when I was at training school, there were some of the senior officers were saying, well, you're going to be at Clipston, you're going to be sorting them out at Clipston. And I hadn't even properly started yet by then. But I, as a new recruit, I was left at division, and it was a place called Hyson Green in Nottingham, which is, to put it in perspective, it's a place where currently there are 200 languages spoken.
Wow.
It's the inner city of the inner city in Nottingham. And I was parading on 6 a.m., 6 p.m. morning shifts, 10 in a row with my tutor, just my tutor. And we were driving around. Then we'd get 1 day off. Then we'd do 10 nights, 10 afternoons. And this was my introduction to the police service.
Wow.
And it went on like that for about 10 months. And occasionally I was drafted in to do the vans, which was what everybody expects. Perhaps I would have been doing the most, but I didn't. I did do a bit at Clipston, actually. I did some at Harworth. I did some in Worksop. I remember we threw a cordon around Worksop, and we were stood on the A1 exit from the north from about 3 a.m, turning people away. Carloads of burly-looking men, and I'm come to see me. I'm visiting my grandma, and my sergeant said, "They're not.
No.
The pickets, turn them around." So I'm still only 10 stone and as green as grass, and still a bit of a tree hugging hippie, and I said, "Well, actually, I'm sorry, but you've got to turn around because my sergeant said you've got to turn." I thought, and then on one occasion I stood on the slip road off the A1 with the number 1 hand signal. And it was a sort of half-hearted hand, and they just drove straight past me. And my inspector just looked at me and shaking his head. So I had to learn. Well, it's controlled aggression, really, isn't it? Yeah. I'd had 5 years lying on a beach, not doing a great deal, and I was working. I worked everywhere I went. But if I saw something I didn't like, a confrontation or any sort of incident I didn't like, I could walk away, which is what the public do. But now I was in a uniform, I couldn't walk away. And there's the old joke in the police, isn't there? You just turn your uniform inside out and mingle with the crowd. And that's what I wanted to do. But
yeah,
of course, you can't. And so I had to learn controlled aggression. There was a couple of incidents where there was a Section 5 and I just sort of let him off. And in fact, after about 3 months at division, my sergeant, Dave Gresley, who was a really ancient-looking fella, he can't have been more than 55 on reflection, but he looked about 90, smoked heavily, and he gave me the right bollocking. He said, if you don't, I won't use the expletives he used, but if you don't do your job, you may as well take your uniform off and go home. Because I was like, you remember that bit in Inspector Clouseau where he watches the bank robbery and he picked money bag up for the thieves.
That's right,
they drive off. That was me. I was so naive. I was walking in the area, and there must have been crimes happening all over the place, and I was so naive, and so that I got that bollocking, and some of my colleagues, he was shouting so loud in Radford Road Police Station. Some of my colleagues must have heard, and one of them came up to me and said, "Why don't you go down the road? There's a rat run down there. Take an HORT1 book and issue a few tickets. That's all you need to do. Just do it a couple of mornings, and they'll start coming in. All the offences will start coming in." And so I did, and I got loads of offences that way. But in those days, you didn't drive the Panda cars.
No, you didn't.
I didn't drive a Panda till I got about 4 or 5 years service. Yeah. And that's when your apprenticeship in the police really begins, when you're in the Panda car, because you're the first at the scene, usually on your own, day and night. And that's when the learning curve just went straight up.
Yeah, your decision-making improves.
Yeah. So I did get a bollocking. After Dave Gresley gave me that bollocking, I was sent to divisional headquarters, and the chief superintendent, I can't remember his name now, he said, it's not a job for everybody. If there's no change, we can't. And I thought, oh, shit. And I thought, I can do this job. I can. I did get quite hardened as an individual when I was travelling. I went 3 days without anything to eat when I was in Athens. So I thought, I can do it. So I did learn, and I ended up doing the 30 years,
That's fascinating. It's not a job for everyone. The chief superintendent's quite right, but actually there is a job for everyone, because you need all types of skills in order to undertake the role of policing.
Yeah.
So when you're in Nottinghamshire Police and the miners' strike and all the things that are going off there, the relationship between the public and the police is well documented. It wasn't most favourable.
Mm.
What was that like, living in the community that you were policing in? Because there was a massive divide, certainly in Nottinghamshire, between the public and the police service, and there still is in some places.
Yeah, well, at the time, I don't know any of my colleagues, myself included, who lived in the area that they policed.
Right.
And in fact, there was a sort of an unwritten rule that you don't in Nottinghamshire. And I live 8 miles from where I used to police. And it always struck me as a writer, because I've always dabbled in writing, that the UK expects all the middle class people from outside the city to come in and police the city and then go home.
Yeah.
Because there was I couldn't think of anybody that lived actually in where they policed.
Wow.
And you wouldn't want to live in Hyson Green particularly.
No, because we got posted in. We weren't allowed to work in the towns in which we lived when I first joined, and we had to go and live in digs. But of course, now there are no digs, and there are no no housing allowance, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, how did your police service progress?
Well, it didn't really, and it never did really. I don't think.
You surprised me. I mean, you're well educated. You speak 2 languages. You've travelled the world. I'm assuming, well, you speak 3 if you include English, but...
I don't speak. I dabble with, I know a bit of French and German, and a tiny bit of Arabic and Hebrew, but that's only because when you live somewhere, you pick it up, don't you? But no, I took my sergeant's exam when I'd got 3 years service, I think. I got 49%, and I didn't bother again. Perhaps I should have done, but there's somebody I joined with who got 51%, and he went on to be a chief inspector. But it never really interested me. I promotion, that is. I always thought I might be a dog officer, but then I didn't get a dog. I didn't apply. I remember at one time in the 90s, there were a lot of shootings, firearm murders. I think we got 36 firearm-related murders in Nottingham.
Wow.
And I put in a long general report asking for a submachine gun and a sidearm and 1,000 rounds of ammunition just to help my colleagues, And I think they just binned it because because it was from me. I think I got a bit of a reputation as being a bit silly. But because when we had at Radford Road, the boiler was coal-fired because it was a Labour council. And we used to get loads of coal left over on the budget. So I suggested that we have, to raise morale in the station, we have a end-of-year excess budget lottery draw. And it was about 2,000 quid left over in the budget. And I thought the staff could have a lottery draw just to help frugality and saving energy and so on. But that was ignored as well. All these suggestions I've made that they're just got ignored.
Where did you serve most of your time?
Well, I did the first half in Hyson Green, which is the multicultural area.
Yeah,
is in modern parlance is known as a challenging area.
Yeah,
and then the second half at Bestwood, which is north of in the city, but still north of the city, near the Nottingham City Hospital. And I was given, part of my beat was the Nottingham City Hospital, and the other half was what's known as a sink estate in government parlance, where there's very high unemployment, high single parents, low poverty, and all this sort of thing. And I found the two areas very, very challenging. And right at the very start, when you get a new beat area, and this is as a community officer, by the way. So the latter half I was a community officer, and you can either approach an area with a little bit of disdain and dispassionate sort of professionalism, or you can approach it in the way I did. And I thought, well, if I was in a village, I'd expect people to know me, and I'd expect to know everybody.
Absolutely.
Because when I joined the police, I was living in Retford, a little village near Retford, and I expected to be just given a push bike and told to ride around the villages Monday to Friday and every weekend off, sort of thing. But they sent me down to Hyson Green. So when I got my own little beat area for the first time, I thought, right, okay, let's treat this holistically as sort of like a village community. So I've got 800 houses on the estate, and I've got 4,000 people who work at the hospital during the daytime. So I'd had some cards printed by the force, and they gave us, Knox gave us, I don't know whether it's the same, they gave us our own personal mobile phone, police mobile phone. So you could give people your phone and your number and all this sort of thing. And at first I started to get snowed under with things, but then it was fantastic, because when I arrived in the department at Oxlade Lane, there was a lady called Helen Bryan at PC, who developed such an amount of trust with the locals. And this was a sink estate, by the way. This was her beat area, was populated by people like Colin Gunn and people like that, the criminal gangs.
Yep.
And she would get a phone call on her phone saying, the drugs are here now. If you come now, you'll catch them. And I thought, because we'd then all run out the door, jump into a van and do the job. But I thought the amount of trust that she's developed with these people, for them to give her this red hot information, I thought that is absolutely brilliant policing. That is superb policing. And I just fear if we've lost that, if the community policing aspect has been lost due to everybody being so busy. Because we were red circled for good 10 years, and we were preserved to do this job, and the results were amazing. Crime drops, AFB drops, and all this sort of thing. And the job satisfaction that you can get is amazing.
And I absolutely agree, because every crime is committed in a community. Whether it's a fraudster in Africa, it still starts in the community. And unless we've got people bringing in that information, crime is going to increase. And we need the community officers to do it, the home beats, whatever you want to call them, because the police service are losing so much information. And when an officer turns up on a response team, they're turning up cold. They don't know the person they're dealing with. Where do we, the people of the police and the police of the people, and that's how it should be working, but it's not working. It's very disjointed at the moment. I hope it goes back, and I hope that the community policing element, even the CID work in the community. A murder takes place in the community.
Yeah. I mean, when I joined in '84, it was the tail end of the sort of Sweeney type of policing. But even then, my first sergeant, Dave Gresley, the ex-CRD chap, at 10 o'clock on 210, he'd say, get your coat, you're coming with me. And we'd go down the road to the Smith's Arms or the Radford Arms, two of the dirtiest, roughest pubs in the world, probably. And we'd be propping the bar up there till 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And occasionally somebody would shuffle up to Dave and say, Dave, I'll just want a quick word with you a minute. And he'd move away, and he'd be nodding his head. And I as naive as I still was, he was being given information.
Yeah.
And because we were drinking in that, obviously the bad thing about it, the unpolitically correct thing was we were in there till 2 a.m, then we all drove home, of course.
Yeah.
But obviously that can't happen now.
No,
quite right.
Yeah, quite rightly so.
But the 4:12 midnight shift would come in, and they'd join us, and most of them still in uniform, and then the night shift would come in, put their helmet on the bar, and they'd be chatting to people as well. And there was the lowest echelons of society in that area were drinking with the police.
Yeah. Giving information.
Of course, that's frowned upon. But we even had at Radford Road a bar upstairs that the public could go in.
Really?
Yeah. Beer was subsidised. We had doos and discos and things in there, and the public could come in. And the public were in there, and it was pound a pint. And we had the public in our bar, and this is the roughest area of Nottingham. So the contact with the public was there, whether we were in their pubs or they were in our bar, but that's all gone.
It has, and I don't know if you remember, but in '94, when they changed the rules around housing allowance and what have you, they started, certainly in Essex, selling off the police houses. Well, that's another part of community policing that was lost, because everybody knew where the police houses were in these different estates. Some were problem estates, some were problem areas, but they had a visible presence. A cheap visible presence as well, and that's what's lost, and that's a real shame. So you're the paradox between working in a hospital, because obviously you've got a transient population, and having a home beat community. There's quite a massive, although you've got the same people going into the hospital, but that's quite a responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, I was only there 8 or 9 hours a day, but they would wait if anything happened at weekends, unless it was urgent. They'd wait and ring me on a Monday morning or whatever when I was next on. But the City Hospital in Nottingham is I don't know if it's unique. I've never worked another one, but there were generations of the same family working there.
Yeah,
and they all lived local. Virtually all of them lived locally, and when I first turned up there was a chap pinching from the hospital, dressing himself up as a builder or a doctor or whatever, and the security team said, "Oh, he's been on again. He's pinched so-and-so." So, well, if you know it's him, why isn't anybody doing anything about it? And it's because of that transient nature of they'd ring the local, they ring 999 and the Panda card come take details. No fault of their own. They're probably in another part of the city tomorrow.
Yeah.
Take details, brief description of the offender, and gone. But it was clear where this fellow was going. He went under a hole in the fence at the back, and he lived somewhere in a flat at the back of the hospital. And I found out his name and checked the records. And when I checked him out on PNC, he'd got 129 convictions already. And he was a Class A drug user. So we had to fund his habit, and he pinched handbags, wallets, mobile phones, computers, anything to get his hands on. And I got a team together, and we got a search warrant for his address and found Nottingham City Hospital computers in his flat. And it's quite funny. This is where it's almost theatrical. When I got him in the interview room, he said, "I'm so pleased you came to see me today, officer, because I found that computer yesterday on the grass. I had no idea what to do with it, but now you can take it from me. Thank you very much." And he was really convincing, and eventually we got him convicted and moved off. But it was interesting dealing with him. But there were other things at the hospital that there were members of staff that were quite obviously pinching. But the problem with the hospital is the doors are always open.
Yeah, they are.
And you can just walk in at any time of day or night into a hospital, and who's going to challenge you? You know, you're walking through a hospital, you might be visiting a relative who's dying. And so the porous nature of the security was a nightmare.
Yeah.
But I worked with the security team, and we got cameras and all this sort of thing, and we managed to keep the crime at manageable levels.
It's an interesting, because what you're demonstrating is that the police service is not one-dimensional, and I think some people get this impression that it's all about enforcement, it's all about arresting people. But it's not, because it's the communication skills, the decision-making, the customer focus. They're the key areas, the ability to communicate.
Yeah. Well, on the council estate, the biggest job I was doing was just giving people advice.
Yeah.
You're not just there to sort out the bad people, but you're there to give advice as well and guidance, because some people, I don't think it's condescending to say that some areas of our country, in the inner cities perhaps, need more guidance than others. And as we all know, ex-coppers, we all know that the buck stops with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
At 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, most people go home. Most other professionals go home, which is fair enough. That's their remit. So the police are there 24/7. We're free advice. We're free help. We're muscle if we're needed. We're there to take the bad people away. But most of the time, I have to say, when I was walking around my beat area, it's a bit of advice and guidance as much as anything.
Yeah.
And if you take that away, if all you can see of a police officer is somebody driving past at 40 miles an hour, there's so much lost. I mean, we keep going over this, but it's so true. I hate to think what's happening now if people are so short-staffed. None of this quality policing is going on, and it's no fault of the ladies and gents that are out there.
No, I think the management have got a lot to answer for in some of these things. I mean, I've got a real view around standards, mobile phones, things like that. And when I see officers driving along and the passenger, they could be updating their work on their mobile device. They could be, but they're not looking out for the stolen car that's in front of them, or the fight that's taking, or the drug deal. They're missing so much because we've become so consumed in technology. Here we are talking to each other 200 miles away on a link. But we've become so consumed with technology that the old-fashioned ability to communicate is actually lost.
Yeah, I remember even now, we could be driving along and I could say to my wife, that car in front looks a bit dodgy. Look at him. Look how he's driving that. And she'll say, "What? How do you know? How do you know? You're not even in the job anymore."
I know.
Or there's a car in front, it starts to slow down and it's weaving around a little bit, and the driver's head keeps going down. He's obviously on his bloody phone.
Yeah.
And my wife says, How do you know?
So
old habits.
Yeah, it does. They do die hard, though. So you're an author now, but you started writing for the Police Review, if I've read that correctly. Yeah. How did you get involved with that?
Well, I used to write so many angry letters to them. I used to email them probably once a week or more often. "Dear sir, did you know that blah, 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 blah?" And eventually they emailed me back saying, "Do you want to write some of this down for us on a regular basis?" I said, "Yeah, sure, yeah." So I was really chuffed. They offered me 500 words a month, 70 quid.
Wow.
100 words. So I had to put in a business interest with the professional standards. Obviously, they let me have it, and I cracked on. And I did it for about 18 months before, sadly, Police Review magazine folded.
I was going to say I hadn't seen it, but yeah, that's a real shame, because that was a lifeline for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was, and I think without any evidence to back this up, I think it was political rather than financial that they were subdued. I don't think Mrs. May liked them at all, because it was the paper of our union, if you like.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Even though it was Jane's publication, it was very critical of the Home Office, and I don't think that was very popular with the government. But yeah, so I wrote a few every month, 500 words. And I remember writing once about this couple of blokes I met in my estate area. And they happily said to me, we're getting between us more than £1,000 a month in benefits. And they were both tow rags, and they both got form as long as your arm. And one of them said, we don't even have to commit crime anymore. And because the benefits system was so generous. And so I got back to tap, home, write my article, sent it off. And I didn't realise, again, so naive. How naive can you be? The police review is syndicated to the Mirror, the Sun. And of course it went in the Sun and various things. And I had this email from some gaffer, please see me, like you do at school, please see me. And he just said, well, think about what you're writing because it's got consequences. And I said, well, I didn't know they were going to do that. I said, well, just think about consequences. And I don't know what he expected to do. I don't even know if it was a bollocking or not, but he just said, think about what you're writing. But what I'd written was true, and it was of interest.
Yeah.
So then I had to sort of self-censor, and the articles had to be a little bit more sort of, boring, I suppose. Because you can't, in the public sector, you can't be honest, can you? Because if you're very honest, it's going to get you in a lot of trouble. Yeah,
you can't have an opinion and you can't be honest.
No. So that was a learning curve.
It's a great shame. Did you serve with Mike Todd?
Yes. I have a story about him. I was working very late one night in the CID office at Radford Road, inputting a computer system that was a dismal failure and was costing millions. We were all working overtime to make this damn thing work. And this bloke came and sat down next to me in a suit, nice looking fellow, very smart. And he said, I have no idea who he was. And he said, tell me, what is this CRIS system really like then? What's it like as a system? I said, do you know what, if I can be honest, and I told him with a few expletives, it's absolute load of rubbish. Look at this. And I was showing him and all this thing. And then I realised he'd only just arrived and he was our new deputy chief or assistant chief. I didn't get a telling off because it was an honest opinion and I didn't know who he was. But then sadly, in the end, he died on a mountainside somewhere, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He was one of the nicest people that I ever had the pleasure of working with. He was a governor at Chelmsford, and he did a swap with a Metropolitan Police inspector called Trevor Hermes, who's another nice chap. But Mike Todd was just one of the nicest guys, and when he took his own life, I mean, that was absolutely terrible. But he took a couple of people from Essex up there. Actually, Ray Berman was another one that transferred up to Nottingham. But did your writings get you into more trouble, or was it always you started to consider your position then?
No, it got me into more trouble because I was in the pub. I was talking about some of these people I dealt with at the hospital, and somebody said, "Oh, you should write it down." So I wrote Hospital Beat. It's an anthology of what I did at the hospital, and I published it as fiction, which it isn't, but it's
no. But I understand.
I thought that would get me out of trouble, and. But that got me into trouble. And I heard later, after retiring, that certain people on command corridor wanted to sack me for it.
Oh, really?
Well, even though I'd got a business interest to be a writer, they argued that that's for magazines. Writing a book is an author. It's a different word. I said, you're joking. I got permission to be a writer, yes, but not books. Well, you never said not books. You never said don't write books. It just said you've got this permission to be a magazine writer. And I just couldn't understand what the problem was. I didn't. If you read Hospital Beat, it's a brilliant example of working with a security team at the hospital, working the police and partnership working together. It's a very positive book about policing, but they didn't like it. There were 12 points in it. I won't bore you, but one of them was when I went to see one of the ward managers. She reached up to get a file off a shelf, and I just made a mental note to myself that she'd got nice legs. And I made a mental note of that in my book. I didn't say it to her. I never mentioned it out loud. And I just put that in the book. And they would, Notts Police PSD, were disciplining me for sexism. I said, well, I never said anything to anybody. Yes, but we don't want the public to think that male officers have such thoughts. I said, well, you're joking, aren't you? How can you police against thoughts? That's not the point. We don't want you writing it down that you do have these thoughts. I said, you're joking, aren't you? I can't believe this is happening. And they were deadly serious. They were disciplining me. I was interviewed for nearly 2 hours on tape by an investigator for writing this book. And I just couldn't believe what was happening. It was that, and for a while they said either you go or the book goes. Yeah, so I had to take it off worldwide sale with Amazon. It took me altogether. It took me 3 months because Amazon had never had somebody contact them and say I've got to take this book off. So it's got to go off in France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Brazil, China, America, Canada, Australia. I've got to make sure it's off sale all over the world. And eventually I did. But then it's, of course, now, a couple of years later when I retired, it's a great selling point because I felt like some Polish poets that had been banned by the communist government. The book was banned.
But it's back on the market now.
Oh, yeah, it's back on now, but...
It's interesting because when we joined, I mean, let's hark back to that. The girls used to get stockings allowance.
Yeah.
I get the misogyny bit, but I just think sometimes things go a little bit too far. It makes me wonder how people form relationships if they can't have opinions, or they can't find an attraction to somebody if they're not allowed to have that opinion. And I think, sometimes in the police service, it's gone a little bit too far. Yeah, there were some things that happened were probably not right, but equally, it's just gone too far around life and relationships in the police. But how many novels have you written?
I've written 8 or 9 books.
Wow.
Most of them are non-fiction. They're just about when I was travelling and in the police and so on. But a couple of years ago, I published my first novel, which is about a pilot in North Africa during World War II, because I stumbled on this video on YouTube of this P-40 Kitty Hawk crash landed in the Egyptian desert, 300 miles from anywhere. And I thought, well, what's the story behind that? And I managed to trace the chap's, the dead pilot's uncle, not uncle, nephew, great-nephew and nephew. And they filled me in on the personal side of what happened. And I built a novel around it, did a lot of research on the war in North Africa. And I published Kitty Hawk Down. I stumbled on a great publisher who published it for me, which was nice. And I've just finished writing another book about a pilot. And that was when I finished the book about the pilot, the RAF pilot in North Africa. I thought I'd like to write another book about a pilot, but what would be a different thing to do? So I've written a book about a German pilot in Leningrad in 1943, which is minus 45 degrees, fighting the Russians. And that's just going to print now. It should be out in May. And that's called Vermisst, which means missing in German. And the subtitle is Missing in Russia. I've added the Missing in Russia bit since Vladimir invaded,
right?
Because of algorithms, you have something with Russia in the title, it might pick up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, I interviewed a guy called Mike Sutton. He's an OBE, but he was the let me get this right. Now, the wing commander at one squadron, and he led the Typhoon operations in Iraq and Syria. And his podcast will be released the week before yours, before this one. And,
right.
And he's written a book called Typhoon. And in fact, he's probably somebody you'd like to speak to, because he's a thoroughly nice chap, but two, you've got an interest in aircraft. He is your man. Absolutely brilliant. 44 years old, and absolutely superb. So what does life look like now for Jonathan Nicholas? Because you're prolific with your writings, but how are you going to progress that, and what are you looking to do for the future?
I don't know, really. Writing is such a thing where you can just let it go wherever you want to take it. I've got a couple of things on the go. With a complete departure, I'm writing about our cats at the moment. I've got 3 cats, and I'm writing about how they've changed our lives in the last 12 years. Which is really, it's light and fluffy, because the thing is, when I wrote about this German chap in Russia, I wrote that he was captured and held in custody till 1950, which was quite common, and the way that the Russians treated them was dreadful. And the last 14 chapters were like one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich. It was so incredibly bleak, and I got halfway through these chapters, and I thought, my God, I'm back here. I sat in my little office over there, and I'm in, and a lot of it I wrote last summer when it was 40 degrees outside, and I'm trying to imagine it's minus 40 degrees, and I thought, God, this is bleak. So I'm glad that's over. So my wife said, why don't you write something a bit lighter? So yeah, I'm writing about the cats.
Brilliant.
And I'm also writing a thriller. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, about somebody that his hobby is following people on the motorway.
Wow.
So I don't know where that's going to go either. But that's just the beauty of writing,
I envy you, because I've got loads of stories, but it's it's about committing them to. This is probably my way of writing. I don't know.
Just write a page. You just write a page. My advice to anybody, and there's a lot of coppers. The thing is, as coppers, we used to write a lot.
Lots, yeah.
And you get a complex case, even a fairly complex case, you've got to write it all down into one page synopsis.
Yeah.
That in itself is an art. Trying to condense a whole thing. You might have multiple TWOC offenders or shoplifters, and you've got to get it all into one page synopsis. That is an art.
Yeah.
And when people write books, publishers say, give me a synopsis. And doing that is an art. So if you want to write a book, don't sit down at a computer or a notepad of blank pages and think, oh God, how do I start? That's completely the wrong approach. Just sit down wherever you are, on the notepad while you're watching telly or listening to music or whatever, write a page, leave it, and when you feel the urge to do another one, write another page. If you do a page a day, that's 365 pages in a year.
Yeah.
You've got a book. You only need a minimum of, say, probably 50, 60,000 words. That's not a lot. That's not a huge amount.
No, it's not.
And there's professionals out there that will copy edit it for you and proofread it for you and do the cover for you, and just get the bare bones down. Because one of the big pieces of advice for writers is you can't edit a blank page. So just write something down, anything, even if it's rubbish, it doesn't matter, because next week you can come back to it. And the clarity of the editing will be amazing. You'll be amazed that, oh no, that's not right, and you change a bit here, change a bit there, and just leave it. You leave it for a few months or come back to it, whatever, So crack on, get writing.
I'm going to do it. I find that, and I might be knocking on your door for some advice, but no, it's great. And this is, I said to you earlier on, what we're doing now is social history. This is what did you do in the war scenario.
Yeah,
and this will be kept forever and ever, amen, in some format. And in 100 years' time, someone will say, "Do you know what? This is what these people did." Before we go any further, is there anything you'd like to add, alter, correct, change?
What, from what I've said to you? I think I've bored you enough, haven't I? Surely.
No, far from it. I found it absolutely captivating, and I'm really grateful for your time. It's these things are time consuming, but I wish you every success in 2023. How do we get hold of you? If we want to look at your books, and I'll put all the links, everything into the format of this page. But if somebody wants to get hold of you to do a talk or whatever, how do I get hold of you?
Well, my website is jonathannicholas.org.uk, and I've got all my contact details on there. I'm on Twitter, JonathanNichol4. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a good medium. I'm on LinkedIn mainly for all the other writers that are on there.
Yeah.
My website's got all my contact details.
And I'll put all of those links in here. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I'm very, very grateful. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've been expecting you to ask me to find 8 records that I couldn't live without.
This is our version of Desert Island Disc, which I absolutely adore. So, no.
It's been an pleasure. No problem at all. Any time at all. If somebody gives you a cancellation, I can come and babble on any time you want me to.
Be careful what you wish for. Thanks ever so much.
Okay, take care.
Take care, mate. Thank you. Bye-bye.